Hello everyone, so the beer that I've just poured there is a Brooklyn Lager clone, and I thought I'd do a grain to glass on this one because it's a recipe that I do come back to fairly regularly. I've actually done a video previously that featured this, one of the Clone Wars videos that I did, so I'll put a link up to that if you haven't watched that one already, but I haven't done a proper grain to glass for this, so here it is, grain to glass video for the Brooklyn Lager clone. Okay, so although this is a clone recipe for this beer, I'm not going to be comparing it to the original or making a big deal about how well it recreates that beer, although I did do that in the Clone Wars video I linked before. For me, the point of this is not really trying to emulate the actual Brooklyn Lager that we get over here, certainly because it's not really my favourite beer, to be brutally honest. But this recipe makes a really good hoppy amber lager, so in my opinion, I think the homebrew recipe for this makes a better beer than the original if you do it well. So that's why I'm doing a video for it, and hopefully if you give it a go you'll get similar results to this. So the recipe is from the BYO website originally, and it's also in a couple of their books. So this one here, if you've got that, it does have the recipe in there. And as I said, one of the reasons I brewed it in the first place was because I saw that recipe and it just looked really good. So the original recipe here is about 4¼ kilos of American 2-row, 400 even grams of Munich, and 300 grams of caramel malt, hopped with Willamette, Cascade, Vanguard. I'd never heard of Vanguard hops before that, seeing this recipe, and didn't get any, so that got subbed out anyway. Hallertau Hersbrucker Saphir hops, which I have used before making this beer and are really good. One of the newer kind of German varieties that's quite tasty, and Cascade hops as well. It's quite heavily dry hopped for a lager, which is kind of the signature for this beer, and yeah, although it's kind of loosely based on a Vienna lager style, it's not really to that style because of the dry hopping and the use of caramel malts and things like that. But that's the original recipe. My own version of it I tweaked slightly to fit what I wanted. Now, rather than using just pale malt, I thought I'd go for a mixture of Vienna and Pilsner malts, so making it a little bit more like an actual Vienna lager in terms of the grain bill. Stuck with the Munich and the caramel malts, and with the hops just a couple of substitutions there. So no Vanguard, as I said, so I put more Saphir in instead of that. And yeah, that was it, I think. Oh, and the Willamette, I used EKG instead because I didn't have any Willamette at the time when I made this version of it, although I've used Willamette before and it works perfectly fine. But so that was the changes I made to the recipe. So in terms of the hopping, based on the original recipe, I tweaked the numbers on this to fit the hops that I was using. I'll put my own recipe underneath in the description if you want to look at that. But on the original, it's the Willamette, 28 grams from 75 minutes. I think I moved that to 60 on my recipe. I did also actually increase the IBUs slightly as well, so I went for 35 rather than 30, just because I tend to find that the bitterness comes out a little bit lower in terms of my perception of it when doing these sort of clone recipes compared to what you want from the actual beer. So yeah, I'll normally bump the IBUs up slightly, which I did with this. Cascade at 30 minutes, so about 1/3 of an ounce of Cascade, or that's roughly 10 grams. The Vanguard or Saphir, which you're also putting in at 35 minutes, is slightly more, 13 grams of that. And then at 2 minutes left in the boil, 1/2 ounce or 14 grams of the Hallertau. I think I used Hersbrucker rather than Mittelfrühe in my version, if I remember rightly. Another 14 grams of Saphir hops, 14 grams of Cascade, also at 2 minutes. And then after fermentation, dry hopped with 21 grams of Cascade and 42 grams of the Hallertau. In this recipe, they recommend White Lab's 833 German Bock yeast. I used the Wyeast Munich lager yeast, which I think is the same as the White Lab's Southern German, which is 8 38 possibly, something like that. I'll have to check that, but really like that lager yeast. It's one of the lager yeasts that I'll come back to, particularly for doing sort of malty or amber style lagers, or the traditional German styles like Helles, or the malty ones like Fest beers and Oktoberfest and so on. And it works really well in this recipe as well. So that's what we have for the recipe. Brew footage. Right, so let's talk about the actual finished product, which I'm pretty pleased with. This has been in the keg for just over 6 weeks. It does benefit from a good bit of conditioning, ideally lagering if you can, but obviously in the keg, when it's in the keezer, it's effectively getting lagered anyway. So yeah, appearance wise, clarity is pretty great. So it's yeah, crystal clear. There's a little bit of condensation on the glass, but I can see straight through that to the camera. It does pour a bit lively out of the keg, but once the head has settled down, it does sort of still hang around at the top. So good, nice nice bit of foam on the top there, and the colour is very nice as well. So fairly yeah, sort of light ambery colour there. Not as dark as some kind of Vienna lagers might be, but it's definitely a bit darker than your average American lager, that's for sure. So on the aroma, despite it having quite a hefty dry hop for yeah, for a beer of this sort of style, it's not actually got a huge amount of hops on the aroma. So it's definitely more the kind of toasty malt stuff coming through, which with the amount of Vienna and Munich malt in there, and the caramel malt as well, is kind of to be expected, I guess. And also the yeast is quite a kind of malt, you know, malt forward sort of yeast as well. So it's a very nice smell, but you don't get much, if any, of the hops. There's a little bit of a floral note there, but I'm not really picking up any kind of citrus notes from the Cascade or anything like that. But yeah, nice toasty, malty aroma to it. Let's dive in. So once you actually get the flavour, there's a bit much more of the hops there straight away. There's a good level of bitterness to it for a lager, so it's definitely kind of more of a, I guess, a crossover between an American pale and a Vienna lager in terms of the actual style, which is, I think, really what I guess the original beer was kind of made for, to set it apart from other lagers, to give it that hop character and a bit more basically oomph in terms of flavour. You do get a little bit of that Cascade kind of zestiness, and then the more traditional kind of German hop flavours, bits of the kind of floral notes and herbal background to it. With the Hallertau varieties, it's always fairly mild, even when you do put quite a big quantity of hops in there. So it's, you know, it's quite pleasant. You still get the malt in the background. Nice, yeah, sort of toasty flavours there. The caramel malt is definitely there as well. So it's not necessarily something that all people enjoy in a lager, the kind of caramel malt flavour. So there's about 5% in this, I think. You know, if you're not a fan of that, you may want to substitute out the caramel malt and put something else in for the colour. Most Vienna lagers, as far as I know, wouldn't generally actually have caramel malt in it. So again, that's one of the areas where it seems more of a sort of crossover with American Pale Ale. But if it's left to condition and lager for long enough, that sweetness from the caramel malt does seem to subside a little bit, and it becomes a bit more crisp and clean on the palate. So when I was tasting it out the keg in the early stages, the caramel malt is more prominent. So interestingly, that seems to fade a little bit, and it becomes a better beer for it, in my opinion. But overall, yeah, it's just a really kind of nice, crisp, slightly sweet amber lager with some good hoppy kick to it as well. And yeah, I'll definitely brew it again. So if you're in the market for something along those lines, I'd recommend you give it a go too. So cheers, guys.
I'm the dude, so that's what you call me, you know? That or his dudeness, or Duder, or, you know, El Duderino.